Hey, thought it might be fun to talk about a Thor comic today. This story isn't my absolute favorite, but it still holds a special place in my heart. Like, my dog's name is Thor, and I have a tattoo based off a drawing from this comic for my dog. I think it's a great series to read if you're looking for a good starting point to start reading some Thor comics. I think this comic establishes the version of the character Thor that I like the best. And this series we're going to talk about today is J. Michael Straczynski's THOR! Okay, before we dive into this, I gotta give you an idea of where Thor comics left off before this and where this story takes place in the 616 universe. So, fun fact, Thor starts out dead. Well, kind of. Ragnarok happened. I know that you kind of understand Ragnarok from the movie, but it's different in comics. Ragnarok is actually the life cycle of Asgardian gods. Every eternity or so, the gods throw down in an epic battle that ends with them dying, and Surtur destroys Asgard. Then Odin, Thor's dad, brings back Asgard with the Odin Force, revives the gods, and the cycle starts over. Except, this last Ragnarok, Thor was able to gain the Odin Force for himself and break the cycle. Thor did, however, still allow Ragnarok to happen. The gods died, Surtur destroyed Asgard, Thor died. And that brings us to the starting point of this comic. And this comic takes place, I don't know, a few years after that, which conveniently brings us just after the Civil War event happened in comic books. Yeah, you probably saw the MCU Civil War movie, but things happened differently in the comics. That was like a year-long event for readers with like hundreds of comics, and Thor was dead for all of that. Well, he's back now. Mjolnir has fallen to Earth, and somebody very special has picked it up. His name is Donald Blake. Back in the day, Donald was Thor as a human. When Odin originally banished Thor to Earth for being an arrogant asshole, he turned Thor into a human, and that human is Donald Blake. He had no clue he was an Asgardian god, he had no clue he was Thor. No memory. This humbled him and humanized him, if you will, and he became a doctor and he helped people. Then he randomly found his hammer in a cave, and when he touched it, it transformed into Thor. This series brings back that aspect, where Thor can transform back into Donald Blake whenever he pleases. Thor can walk around as a human among humans. Among? So Thor and Donald can actually talk to each other in their head. It's a great inner dialogue that keeps Thor in check with his human side. So we start out with Thor talking to Donald in the void of death, and Thor doesn't know if he wants to come back to the living. Donnie says, hey, that's up to you, but if you don't return, people are gonna die that we could have saved. Thor divulges that, yeah, he loves the mortal world, but he loves his own world just as much. Eventually he decides, okay, let's wake up and rebuild Asgard. So Thor decides to travel to Oklahoma. That's right, Oklahoma. Donald Blake checks into a hotel and meets a nice lady named Beth. I think my favorite interactions in this comic are between Thor and the townsfolk. Whether it's Thor or Donald Blake, it doesn't matter. It's always good. Straczynski does a great job of showing that Thor loves humans. Donald heads out, transforms into Thor, time to rebuild Asgard. Takes about a week of whirling Mjolnir around, but he gets it done. And there it is. Asgard, home of the gods, in bumblefuck Oklahoma. Some cops show up and they go, hey, you can't put that here. Somebody owns this land. Thor goes, yeah, no problem, and lifts Asgard so it sits 8 feet above the ground. The cops don't know what to do, so they take off, and the next day the landowner shows up and goes, hey, you can't put that here. I own this land, and this land is valuable. Thor says, all right, come on up, and proceeds to buy the land from him. And it's official. Asgard and the land that it's on is bought and paid for and owned by Thor. And now it's time to bring back the gods. In the last Ragnarok, when the gods died, their souls dropped to Earth and bonded with humans. So now Thor has the task of finding the humans that the gods' souls lay dormant in and waking them up. This leads us to New Orleans. Thor senses a familiar presence there and decides to go check it out. He finds that this is the New Orleans post-Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina took place during the Civil War, and Thor reflects on this. So many people died from a storm, and a storm is exactly what Thor can push away. Thor could have saved so many lives, and the words they use in the comic is that knowing this fact and that he could have helped burns him to the core. I love that Thor knows he couldn't be there, but he still feels horrible for what happened. And then this brings up the question to Thor, where were the rest of the heroes? They were off fighting each other instead of saving people. Thor doesn't like that. A resident comes out and confronts Thor and says, get on out of here, we don't like your kind around here. He goes, where were you when we needed you? And Thor answers, I was dead. This guy states that now it's Thor's responsibility to save their future. As he's making this point, Iron Man drops in. He says, hey Thor, good to see you, we missed you. Thor says nothing. Tony decides to get sarcastic, but still no response from Thor. Tony then decides to get to business. He explains that no one can just drop a god city wherever they want in the USA, even if it's paid for. Then he explains that things are different now, and if Thor doesn't join his side of the Civil War, he's gonna take Thor down. Tony doesn't seem to know that Thor knows what he did during the Civil War. What did Tony do during the Civil War? Well, while Tony was off fighting Captain America, he and Reed fucking Richards decide to make a clone of Thor. During a battle, this clone went way too far and killed Goliath. Real Thor didn't have any issues with Goliath. He considers Goliath a friend. Back to the story. Thor then decides to bring the lightning. He is fucking pissed at what Tony did, and he proceeds to bitch Tony out for it. Is this how you define our friendship? Is it? Iron Man starts to explain himself, and Thor decides to give him a spang and a krang. Tony, being the cocky little shit that he is, says, I had hoped to do this the easy way, but you left me no choice. I'll apologize later. And then he blasts Thor with everything he's got. And that didn't do shit. Okay, hand-to-hand combat it is. Spang! This leaves Tony shocked. Thor is more powerful than he's ever seen. His armor is fucked up and he has almost no power left. He's like, dude, have you been working out? Thor says, nah. I'm just not holding back anymore, and fucking blasts him with another lightning bolt. Tony's fucked up now. And this is when Thor grabs him and says, give your orders and ultimatums to those who choose to obey or are too cowardly to fight. Not to me. Threaten me again, and you'll learn the difference between a god of thunder and a man in a metal suit. That shit gives me goosebumps. Your masters only understand power, and if they want to test me, I'll fuck their shit up too and show them what true power really is. And then he says he doesn't care to get involved with Tony's War of Brothers. Tony agrees to leave Thor alone, and they'll consider Asgard as a diplomatic embassy with diplomatic immunity.
Diplomatic immunity.
Thor says that's fine and starts to head out. Tony says, hey man, my armor's fried. How the hell am I supposed to get out of here? And Thor, like a badass, says, walk. Back to that guy from before. Thor recognizes his soul. It's a god from Asgard. So Thor reawakens him, brings him back to life, and it's not any god. It's motherfucking Heimdall. The next issue of the story, Donald Blake decides to go to Africa and help out and be a doctor. Mostly this issue covers how much Donald Blake loves caring for people and get some character development going. He meets 3 random guys there that are friends that seemingly have been brought there by fate. Some shit goes down and Thor helps out by laying down the hammer. He gets shot a lot and throws down the hammer again. It's a little obvious, but we discover that those 3 guys from before are actually the Warriors 3. Thor wakes them up, they reunite, he breaks up the ground, and he takes his friends back home to Asgard. Next issue opens up with one of the townsfolk building a mailbox for Asgard, and he leaves an invitation in there. I love this. I love that there's these small townsfolk reaching out to the Asgardians to make them feel welcome and inviting them to a town hall meeting because now they're part of the town. And once again, it reinforces why Thor loves humans and loves humanity and the good aspects of people. All right? Let's continue. Heimdall's been searching for the missing gods, but he notices a darkness growing out in the west, so Thor decides to go check it out. Thor heads out there and finds what Heimdall was looking at. It's some sort of underground facility, and Thor finds a bunch of people locked up down there. But that's not all. The Destroyer's down there too. The Destroyer is a magical suit of armor that typically Odin wears. Thor's worn it before, but mostly Odin wears it. But Odin isn't here, and Thor knows when the Destroyer's walking around, you gotta fight it. So he does. There's a Cthulhu and a kaboom. Thor has a little conversation with Donnie about whose spirit might be in there controlling the Destroyer. Thor decides to summon his thunder powers and wake up the gods from within those people. Oh yeah, those people that were locked up, they're gods. Then he comes to discover that his brother Baldur was in the armor. Baldur was upset because Thor allowed Ragnarok to happen and allowed Asgard to be destroyed, and Baldur lives to protect Asgard. And he was understandably upset. He had his moment, he said his piece, and now he's chilled out. All of the reawakened gods decided to book it and get the hell out of there, except for one. And it's Thor's lady, Lady Sif. In these comics, Thor is with Sif. He's not with Jane Foster, okay? So don't let the movies fool you completely, all right? But you know what? That's not Lady Sif. It's motherfucking Loki. This asshole put his soul in Thor's lady's body just to fuck with Thor. So even though he looks like Thor's girlfriend, he reassures Thor, I have no reason to misbehave. I got that out of my system. I'm gonna be good now. I've got no reason to deceive you, brother. And Thor's sitting there like, please don't fuck with me, and please don't fuck up again. So we wrap up this issue discovering that the gods that ran away were actually the bad gods of Asgard, and it was Loki and Doctor Doom that made that happen. Bastards! Last issue wraps up our story. Some of the Asgardians actually went to the town hall meeting and they learned about sanitation and that it's not okay to just throw your waste over the wall. Hogan helps out a guy and his son from town change a tire. Then this random guy, Bill, who works at the local diner, goes out for a walk in the town one night. He discovers the goddess Kelda. They have a friendly conversation about names, and to his surprise, she flirts with him. Then Thor has a conversation with Donald about the risk of bringing back every single god instead of just the gods that he trusts. Thor wants to start fresh and let the gods live how they want to live and not just be confined to Asgard. The risk is that if Odin is reawakened, then he might bring back the old ways of the gods that lead to Ragnarok. Donald says that if Thor doesn't bring back all the gods at once and continues to search for them one by one, he runs the risk of them dying in their human forms. And then he says, listen man, there aren't any easy answers. It wouldn't be life if there were. Donald does a Thor crack-a-boom, flies above the clouds, and then proceeds to bring back the rest of the gods at once. It works, but it takes a ton of Thor's power, so the comic ends with Thor falling back to Earth. So that's it. Those are the first 6 issues of J. Michael Straczynski's Thor. I believe it goes for another 2 volumes, and those are just as enjoyable as this one was. The reason I love this series, besides the fact that Thor kicks the shit out of Iron Man, is that it clearly defines the difference between Asgardian gods and humans. I absolutely love these little moments of the Asgardians and Thor interacting with the town and these town folk. They're friendly and kind to each other, and their genuine interaction is refreshing to read. I love that Thor got Donald Blake back and he gets to have this inner dialogue with his human side. He wants to protect humanity and make up for the time that he was gone, but he also wants to be a fair king to the Asgardians. Thor is striving to be the person that he's always wanted to be, and that is a hero that's worthy of lifting Mjolnir. It's a good series, and I recommend it if you want to start Thor from a fresh beginning. Okay, that was fun. I enjoy talking about comic books. I'll start thinking about the next series I want to cover. Until then, see ya. Subscribe!